So now we are going to discuss n8n. Previously, we saw how Zapier works. n8n is a powerful alternative for automating your work, but with a unique visual and open source approach. Think of it as a digital assistant that helps you connect and automate a huge variety of applications and services without needing to be a coding expert. First, let's discuss the differences between n8n and Zapier. So in terms of hosting, Zapier only provides a cloud-based solution. However, for n8n, you have two options. It has the cloud-based one, similar to Zapier, but it also provides a self-hosting service. Now, self-hosting basically means that you can run n8n locally on a local server or even on your laptop. And in that case, you have complete control over it. And moreover, it becomes free to use. However, for convenience, you can always use the cloud-based version as well. In terms of flexibility, Zapier is a no-code solution. It doesn't require any sort of coding whatsoever, and it's very user-friendly. Now, n8n, on the other hand, it also supports a bit of no-code, but it's mostly low-code, which means that you don't have to write a lot of code, but there is usually a bit of code involved. It's not very complex, but it does need a bit of coding in certain automation workflows. It is slightly more complex than Zapier, and it's open source. Now, n8n is a bit more powerful and more flexible than Zapier because obviously, since you can code, so you can create advanced workflows. In terms of pricing, Zapier is slightly more expensive because it charges per task. And it can become expensive if you have lots of tasks running. Zapier provides a free tier which runs for 14 days, so you can try out all the premium features and then decide whether you want to go ahead with the subscription or not. For n8n, there are two options. If you're using the cloud-based version, then obviously there is again a free tier, but after that you have to pay. But if you are self-hosting, then it becomes completely free. So that's something you can keep in mind. n8n allows us to automate workflows between hundreds of applications and services using a visual node-based interface. It supports custom scripts, API integrations, and conditional logic. So it's a bit more elaborate than Zapier because it has API integrations, custom scripts, and a bit more complex workflows that you can orchestrate. So Zapier is usually used by no-code developers, but n8n is used by both no-code, low-code, as well as advanced developers. Now let's have a look at the key terms in the n8n ecosystem. So the building block in n8n is the node, which is a step or an action. So similarly, when we were discussing Zapier, we had those discrete steps, right? So every node is that discrete step. For example, we had a step for Google Sheets, a step for Gmail, and those kind of things. The next is trigger, which is similar to what we had previously. So this is an event that kicks off your workflow. And finally, the data flow. So these are arrowed lines between steps, similar to what we had in Zapier. So when you move from one node or one step to the next, you have this arrowed line. And this is exactly what n8n also has. So a lot of similarities between the two. So let's head over to n8n.io. Click on Get Started. Enter your name, email address, choose a password, choose an account name, and then start your 14 days free trial. We can skip inviting other members. Obviously, you can do that later on if you want. It can take a few minutes to set up, but once you're done, you can click Start Automating. So this is the main landing page, and this whole window is called a canvas. Once you sign in, you get this 14 days of free trial, but later on, you can obviously self-host on your local system or server so that it becomes free. So near the top, you can create a new workflow. And then you have an analytics section where you can see the metrics for your different workflows. And in the screen below, you can see all the different workflows that you have already created. And on the bottom left corner, you also have access to thousands of templates. Here you have access to thousands of pre-built templates that you can quickly leverage to create workflows. At the top, you can also select based on the specific niche. For example, IT operations, marketing, document, and others. Let's head back to the home page. So let's create our first workflow. There are two ways you can do this. Either you can directly create workflow from here, or you can also go plus workflow and create in personal. In either case, you're going to land on this page. So the first step is the trigger. This is the event or action that is going to trigger or kick off our workflow. So if I click plus, we're going to start with a chat trigger, which basically means that any time that the user inputs a new text message, it's going to kick off our workflow. You can click test chat, and now whatever you type here, for example, let's say I type hello, this thing turned green and you see the small tick, which basically means node executed successfully. So what was the input? It was hello, and when chat message received, this is what we see here. There's a session ID, there's an action, send message, and here is the actual text that we input. At this stage, just understanding that we created a trigger which is based on chat is good enough. You can hide and unhide the chat window from here. Now the next thing is we want to connect it to an AI model. So we're going to click AI, and from here we're going to click AI agent. Now there are some important things that you need to understand. First of all, on the left side is the input window. So this means what is this AI agent getting as an input? So if you notice here, the input is coming from the previous step, which was when chat message received trigger, which had a session ID once again, an action, and the actual chat input. This is important because we're going to need this when we want to actually do something with whatever the user has input. On the right side would be the output. At this point, we're not going to see any output because we haven't configured the AI agent completely. But at this point, just understand the overall structure. Okay, on the left side, we have the input. On the right side, we have the output. And if you see here, these are the parameters and settings. Now here it says, what is the source for the prompt? This is the user message, which is coming from the previous step. And this is the actual expression, which is going to fetch the actual text message which user has typed. So if you see here, the name is chat input. And here also it says $JSON.chat input. Now JSON is just a simple data structure in which you can basically put information. So JSON is just a way of structuring your data. And here you have multiple views. This is the schema view. You also have the table view. You also have the JSON view. So JSON is nothing but just a way of structuring data in this format. There's a key and a value, a key and a value, a key and a value. So JSON is very popular because it's used online in all of different web applications, because we need a sort of standard way of sending messages from one point to another. And this is one of the ways to structure your data. Okay, now let's click anywhere, or you can click back to canvas. And periodically, it's always nice to save your workflow. So far we have configured the trigger and we are sort of configuring the AI agent at this point. Now chat model is what we're going to use as the backend LLM. So the brain of the agent. Now there are several different options you can use. For example, you have the OpenAI chat model, ChatGPT sort of backend. You can also use Gemini, you have Llama, and so many others. But as a starting point, I would recommend to go with Google Gemini chat model because it is free to use and very easy to configure for now. Okay, so we're going to go with that one. Once again, you're seeing the input and the output. Now here you need to provide the credentials. We need to create a new credential. Just understand that this is the part where you want to authorize an API key for your Google Gemini chat LLM model in the backend. Okay, you want this AI agent to use that. But for this agent to be able to do that, it needs authorization. Okay, so you're going to click create new credential. So we need an API key. It's very easy to fetch that. Go to aistudio.google.com. Sign in with your Gmail account. I'm currently signed in with mine. And here you're going to see this get API key. And here click create API key. You can create a new project or use a one that's already existing and click generate API key. And once it has been generated, you can copy it, head back to this window and put it here and save. Now, when you save it, what n8n is going to do is that this AI agent is going to use this API key to connect to Google Gemini API backend. So that is sort of like the LLM model. And it's going to make a small call to it and just for testing purposes and see if it is getting a response. And if it is getting a response, it means that your AI agent is actually connected to Google Gemini chat model. Now, next thing is that every LLM offers several different models. Like for example, for ChatGPT, you have 4.0, you have ChatGPT 5. So those are sort of like models within the LLM. So in this one, you can use anyone that you want. I would prefer, for example, let's say go with Gemini 2.0 flashlight preview. And then you can click anywhere and save it. Okay, let me hide the chat and let me zoom in a little bit. For moving around the canvas, press the center mouse button or the scroll wheel pressed and move the mouse around. So far what we have done is that we have created a trigger and we are configuring the AI agent. We have just configured sort of like the brain of the AI agent, which is Google Gemini chat model. And we have created a new API key using our account and we have linked it. So now this AI agent is going to use this as sort of like the backend or as the brain to actually process and respond. There's one more thing which is obligatory you need to do is the memory. So memory is a way for the AI to remember past interactions during a workflow. So it doesn't treat each step like it's starting from scratch. So without the memory, the AI is going to forget everything after each message. So usually when you talk to an AI, let's say you ask it something, then it gives you a response, then you ask it something else. It still remembers what you asked and what it responded with initially. So that sort of context is what's required, and that is done through a memory. So the memory can carry context forward across multiple messages, and this is essential for having a coherent conversation or doing a multi-step task. For example, let's say you ask, what's the capital of France? It says Paris, and what's the weather there? Now, there is sort of like Paris, right? AI agent needs to remember that and recall that, okay? So for that, we need to configure memory. And for memory, you can just pick simple memory. You can leave the defaults as they are. So this means how many messages back do you want your AI model to remember? So we have set it to 5, which is a decent limit. So let's go back. Let's save it once again. So now we have already tested the first step and we saw the output, right? Now let's go to AI agent and let's test this step as well. So for this one, once again, this is the input that it is getting. It is going to get the chat input, which is the hello part, and it is going to show some outputs, okay? So let's execute this step. So what happened was that this AI agent fetched this chat input part from the input, which is coming from the previous step. It submitted it to Google Gemini backend. It received the response and it showed that as the output. So that's pretty cool. Now, interestingly, if you go to the logs and you see here, this is the memory, which is sort of like storing whatever the interaction or instructions that we have. But if you go to Google Gemini chat model, it's going to show you what was the input. Human entered hello, and the AI model responded with hello, how can I help you today? And so on. Okay, so that's done. Now let's test it end to end. So if I type, what is the capital of France? What's going to happen is that this message is going to go here. The AI agent is going to send it to Google Gemini backend. It's going to receive the response. Memory would obviously be involved. And the response would be shown in the chatbot. So the capital of France is Paris. And let's say if I ask, and what's the weather there? Now in this case, we haven't specified Paris again, but the AI model is going to remember that because the memory, it has already stored the previous question. So that's the cool thing. Let me ask that. Well, it says I'm unable to provide you with real-time information, but it has specified some websites where you can go and ask. For example, you can ask something like, so once again, we didn't specify that what is it. But it already remembers that we are talking about Paris, right? The population of Paris is complex, but for example, the actual city of Paris is roughly 2.1 million, but Ile-de-France, which is sort of like the region around the Paris and, sort of like the suburbs, it's 12.3 million. So that was our first lab. So a couple of additional things which you can notice here is that always, first of all, always remember to save it periodically. Secondly, if you go in executions, you can see the different prompts that you had given. For example, I can check this one and it is going to show you the input, the output, and what happened. Was it successful or not? If I pick this one, once again, it's going to show you the input and the output. So you can sort of like check the history of the executions as well. But usually we'll be working in the editor mode. So once you have created a workflow and you're happy with it, you can basically go ahead and share it with other people. So the way to do it is to go here, click on download. So here is the JSON file, which we have just downloaded, chatbot.json. And the way it's structured is that it's using a JSON format. And what's JSON format? You basically just have key and then the value. For example, the name is chatbot, and then it has several nodes in it. So for example, if I expand this, the first node is this one, which is basically the chat trigger node. And it has, the different parameters, configurations. The second node is the memory. The third node is the AI agent, and so on. So the nice thing is that you can directly export it, and then anyone who wants to use the same workflow without having to create it from the scratch can directly import it. Let me show that to you. So the way to import a workflow is, first of all, create a new workflow. Let's name it imported chatbot, and it's a good practice to always name your workflows. So once the workflow has been named, you go here, click import from file, browse to the correct folder. So for example, this is the JSON file, and then import it. And there you go. So that's how you can basically export and import any workflow. Also, for the purpose of this course, for every workflow that we create, I'm going to share the JSON file, which you can download. So let me show that to you. So if you go to the resources section of the lecture, you can download the chatbot.json file from here. And another cool thing is that n8n strips away all the credentials. So any of the API keys, credentials that you have in the workflow would be removed. So you will have to configure those credentials again, but the workflow would be there.